Welcome to the Growth Room. Today we're exploring one of the most refreshing and brutally honest self-improvement books ever written, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***ck by Mark Manson. In this audiobook summary, you'll discover why happiness doesn't come from avoiding problems, but from choosing the right problems to solve. If you look around today, you'll notice we are living in a historic era of overwhelm. We are completely bombarded with messages telling us to buy more, be more, and achieve more. Every time you open an app, you're flooded with images of people living their absolute best lives, working out at 5 a.m., running highly successful businesses, and smiling through flawless, filter vacations. This creates a hidden, toxic pressure. It tells us that if we aren't completely happy, rich, and stress-free all the time, we are somehow failing. This brings us directly to the author of this book, Mark Manson. Manson didn't start his career as a traditional academic psychologist or a corporate motivational speaker. He started as a blogger writing raw, unfiltered thoughts on the internet about relationships, psychology, and personal development. He became famous for cutting through the noise with a unique blend of scientific insight, philosophical wisdom, and a heavy dose of tough love. Manson noticed that the modern self-help industry was actually making people miserable by promoting what we now call toxic positivity. This is the forced, artificial idea that we must remain positive at all costs, sweep negative emotions under the rug, and constantly chase a flawless state of mind. The central message of this book is a massive reality check. Life is messy, painful, and deeply limited. You cannot care about everything. If you try to care equally about your career, your social media feed, what your neighbor thinks of your car, your fitness goals, and every minor inconvenience that happens during your day, you will drive yourself crazy. Your mental energy is a finite resource. Therefore, the secret to a good life isn't avoiding struggles or caring about more things. It's learning how to focus your limited attention exclusively on what truly matters. It's about being comfortable with being different, being flawed, and facing adversity head-on. Let's dive into the core philosophy of the book, beginning with a concept that sounds completely counterintuitive: don't try. To understand why trying so hard is ruining our peace of mind, we have to look at a psychological phenomenon known as the backwards law. This idea, originally popularized by philosopher Alan Watts, states that the more you desperately chase a positive experience, the more you actually reinforce the feeling that you lack it in the first place. Think about it. When you spend every single day reciting affirmations in the mirror about how rich or confident you want to be, your subconscious mind is actually screaming, "Hey, I'm saying this because I'm currently broke and insecure." The desperate pursuit of a feeling only highlights its absence. Conversely, the backwards law shows us that accepting a negative experience is actually a positive experience. When you accept that you feel anxious before a major presentation, the anxiety loses its power over you. When you accept that you made a mistake at work or failed an exam, you stop wasting energy hiding from it and can finally start fixing it. Chasing happiness directly almost always fails because happiness isn't a destination you arrive at by accumulating wins. It's a side effect of how you handle your losses. This shifts us smoothly into a profound truth about human nature. Happiness comes from solving problems, not from a life without them. Many people fall into a dangerous psychological trap. They believe that once they hit a certain milestone, whether that's graduating from college, getting a specific job, entering a relationship, or reaching a certain savings goal, their problems will magically vanish. They view happiness as a static equation to be solved. But human biology and psychology don't work that way. We are hardwired to adapt to our circumstances. As soon as you solve one problem, a brand new, slightly more sophisticated problem immediately takes its place. Think about a practical, real-life example. Let's say you're a student struggling to balance your coursework, or an aspiring software engineer trying to land your first role. You might think, if I could just pass this final exam or land this tech internship, I'll finally be happy and relaxed. But what happens when you actually get that internship? The initial wave of excitement wears off in a few days. Suddenly, you face a whole new set of complex challenges. Managing difficult team dynamics, learning a massive, confusing codebase under a tight deadline, and battling intense imposter syndrome. Struggles, stress, and friction are completely unavoidable aspects of being alive. Therefore, the ultimate question that determines the quality of your life isn't what brings you pleasure or how do you want to enjoy yourself. Anyone can enjoy a nice meal, a relaxing vacation, or a praise-filled performance review. The real question that changes everything is, what pain are you willing to sustain? Or the struggles you are genuinely willing to choose? True satisfaction is born from the active process of overcoming challenges. If you want the physical benefits of being in incredible shape, you have to choose the grueling, repetitive pain of working out consistently and eating clean. If you want the freedom and financial rewards of entrepreneurship, you have to choose the severe stress of financial uncertainty, long hours, and the constant threat of public failure. If you want a deep, lasting romantic relationship, you have to choose the vulnerable, uncomfortable conversations required to navigate disagreements and set healthy boundaries. When you shift your mindset from how do I escape my problems to how do I choose better problems to solve, your entire perspective on personal growth changes. You stop viewing friction as a sign that your life is broken, and you start viewing it as the literal currency required to build a meaningful existence. Growth isn't about reaching a magical, problem-free paradise. It's about upgrading your problems over time. This brings us to one of the most challenging but liberating realities of the human experience, the fact that you are not special. In our modern culture, we are constantly fed a narrative of extreme entitlement. From a young age, many of us were told by parents, teachers, and media that we were destined for absolute greatness, that we had unique gifts, and that we deserved to succeed simply by existing. This message was well-intentioned, designed to build high self-esteem. However, it created a massive psychological trap. When you grow up believing you are inherently special, you develop an unconscious expectation that life should bend to your will without you having to put in the grueling, ordinary work required for true competence. Entitlement manifests in two distinct ways. The first is the classic, arrogant form. I am amazing, and everyone else needs to recognize my greatness and treat me perfectly. The second, more subtle form is a victim mentality. My life is uniquely terrible. My problems are completely different from anyone else's, and therefore the normal rules of effort and responsibility don't apply to me. Both mindsets are built on the exact same delusion, the belief that you deserve special treatment from the universe. When this entitlement collides with reality, it causes immense psychological suffering. The truth is that most of what we do and most of who we are is remarkably average. Being average has become a modern insult. Yet by definition, the vast majority of us occupy the middle of the bell curve in almost every skill, trait, and achievement. When you accept your own ordinariness, a strange thing happens. The crushing pressure to be a world-changing genius evaporates. You stop looking for validation through grand, dramatic gestures and start focusing on the quiet, repetitive, day-to-day discipline that actually moves the needle in your career, your studies, and your personal development. To break free from this trap, we must deeply examine the value of suffering and understand how to choose what truly matters. Suffering is an evolutionary mechanism. It is our body and mind's way of telling us that something is out of balance, that a boundary has been crossed, or that a change needs to be made. Physical pain prevents us from walking into fire. Emotional pain alerts us to broken trust or toxic situations. Therefore, try to eliminate suffering from your life is not only impossible, it is completely counterproductive. The goal isn't a life without pain. The goal is to experience meaningful struggle. The difference between constructive suffering and destructive suffering comes down to your personal values. If your core values are shallow, such as constant social validation, superficial wealth, or always being right, your suffering will feel empty and frustrating. When someone unfollows you on social media, or when you can't afford a luxury item that your peer posted online, You will experience genuine emotional distress. But this is low-level, meaningless suffering built on unstable metrics. Conversely, if you anchor your life to high-quality, internal values like honesty, curiosity, self-discipline, or serving others, your struggles take on a completely different character. When you experience the pain of staying up late to study complex programming concepts, or when you face the emotional friction of admitting you were wrong during a professional disagreement, that suffering feels purposeful. It feels like the necessary tax you pay for self-improvement and emotional maturity. This concept applies powerfully to almost every practical area of life. Let's look at how it reshapes our approach to confidence building and mental resilience. True confidence is not the absolute certainty that you will succeed when you try something new. That isn't confidence, that's delusion. Real confidence is simply being entirely comfortable with the prospect of failure. It is the deep, internal realization that even if you completely bomb an interview, get rejected by someone you like, or launch a project that goes nowhere, you will still be okay. Your fundamental worth isn't tied to the external outcome. When you stop giving a F*** about the sting of temporary rejection, you gain a massive competitive advantage. You become willing to take the calculated risks that entitled or overly sensitive people avoid. You start looking at failure not as a permanent stain on your identity, but as a neutral data point telling you how to adjust your strategy moving forward. This is the bedrock of mental resilience. Consider how this plays out in our hyper-connected digital world, where comparison culture is at an all-time high. Social media acts as an absolute amplifier for human insecurity. It forces us to compare our messy, unedited behind-the-scenes footage with everyone else's perfectly curated highlight reels. We see a peer land a prestigious job or scale a startup, and we instantly feel a wave of envy and self-doubt. But when you understand values-based living, you look at social media through a completely different lens. You realize that a lot of what you see online is a superficial metric, a game of vanity that has nothing to do with deep internal satisfaction. You learn to practice selective attention. You actively choose to ignore the digital noise, the fear of missing out, and the constant demand for external validation. You redirect that exact same mental energy toward your own lane, focusing entirely on your own metrics of growth, your own projects, and your own immediate reality. This realization leads us directly to the absolute cornerstone of Mark Manson's entire philosophy, a concept that completely redefines how we view our control over our lives. You are always choosing. Whether you consciously realize it or not, you're making a choice in every single moment about how to interpret your circumstances and how to react to them. We often find ourselves in situations that are incredibly unfair, painful, or completely outside of our control. We suffer setbacks, experience heartbreaks, or face systemic challenges that we did absolutely nothing to deserve. It is incredibly easy and completely natural to fall into a state of resentment and blame when these things happen. However, there's a massive, life-altering distinction that we must make if we want to maintain our mental sanity. The difference between responsibility and blame. Blame looks backward. It identifies who caused the problem, who broke the system, or who did you wrong. Responsibility, on the other hand, looks entirely forward. It asks, given the current reality of the situation, what am I going to do right now to move forward? You may not be to blame for a sudden medical issue, a corporate layoff, or a chaotic childhood. You are a victim of those circumstances, and the blame lies elsewhere. But you're always responsible for how you choose to live your life in the aftermath of those events. You are responsible for managing your emotional recovery, choosing your next career move, and deciding whether you will let your past trauma define your future. Blame says, this happened to me, so I'm stuck. Responsibility says, this happened to me, and now it is my job to figure out the next step. Taking total ownership of your choices is the ultimate form of personal power. This radical ownership over our choices brings us to a mind-bending truth that most people spend their entire lives running away from. You're wrong about everything. We tend to look at personal growth as a process of moving from a state of being wrong to a state of being completely right. We assume that as we get older, gain experience, and accumulate knowledge, we are steadily collecting absolute truths about the world. But this is a massive psychological illusion. True growth doesn't mean arriving at a permanent destination of correctness. It means becoming slightly less wrong every single day. Human psychology is deeply flawed. Our brains are not designed to perceive objective reality. They're wired for efficiency, survival, and protecting our fragile egos. We are constantly fallible. We look at the world through a thick lens of cognitive biases, emotional projections, and incomplete information. We misinterpret people's intentions, remember past events inaccurately, and make wildly incorrect assumptions about what will make us happy in the future. When you firmly believe you are right about your worldview, your capabilities, or your limitations, you trap yourself in a mental cage. For instance, if you convince yourself, "I am just not a naturally technical person," or "I am completely incapable of public speaking," you treat those beliefs as absolute laws of physics. You won't even attempt to learn programming or step on a stage because your brain desperately wants to protect your current identity and avoid the discomfort of being proven wrong. To break out of this trap, you must deliberately cultivate a growth mindset. This means shifting your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of viewing uncertainty as something terrifying that must be avoided through forced certainty, you start viewing it as the ultimate catalyst for continuous learning. True self-awareness isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to constantly question your own beliefs. You need to look at your most deeply held assumptions and ask yourself, what if I'm wrong about this? What if the person I disagree with actually has a valid point? What if my current failure isn't proof that I'm incompetent, but simply proof that my current strategy needs to change? When you become comfortable with being wrong, the fear of making mistakes completely dissolves. You stop treating your ideas as an extension of your identity, which allows you to discard bad ideas the second better data comes along. This profound willingness to be wrong flows naturally into our next major concept. Failure is the way forward. In our education systems and corporate cultures, failure is almost universally treated as a disaster, a permanent stain on your record, or a clear sign of deficiency. Because of this societal conditioning, most people develop an intense, paralyzing fear of failing. They become so terrified of the negative emotions associated with messing up that they subconsciously choose a life of safe, comfortable mediocrity. They stay in dead-end jobs, avoid pitching their unique ideas, and never take the calculated risks required to build something extraordinary. But if you look at any world-class performer, whether they are an elite athlete, a groundbreaking scientist, or a highly successful entrepreneur, their entire trajectory is built on a mountain of failures. The simple reality of human development is that our magnitude of success is directly proportional to how many times we have failed at that specific thing. Think about how a toddler learns to walk. They don't stand up, take 2 steps, fall down, and think to themselves, "Well, I guess walking just isn't my thing, I should probably stick to crawling." They don't internalize the fall as a personal flaw. They simply process the neutral data, adjust their balance slightly, and try again. They fail hundreds of times before they succeed. Somewhere along the line, as we grow up, we lose this natural relationship with learning. We start believing that failing makes us a failure. The only way to build true mental resilience and achieve meaningful career growth is to fundamentally redefine your relationship with mistakes. Manson introduces a powerful framework called the do something principle to help us overcome the paralysis of fear. Most people operate under the assumption that motivation flows in a linear sequence. First, you get an inspiration. That inspiration gives you motivation, and that motivation finally drives you to take action. The problem with this model is that if you're feeling depressed, overwhelmed, or stuck, the initial inspiration never comes. As a result, you spend weeks or months waiting around for the perfect moment to start your project, study for that difficult certification, or launch your business. The do something principle completely flips this equation on its head. It reveals that action is not just the effect of motivation. It is also the cause of it. The process is actually a continuous loop. Action leads to inspiration, which leads to motivation, which leads to further action. When you find yourself completely paralyzed by a massive task, you don't need to figure out the entire roadmap. You don't need to know how you're going to write a whole 50-page report or build a complex back-end architecture from scratch. You just need to commit to doing one tiny, almost laughably small action. Sit down and write one single sentence. Open up your code editor and write one function. Spend exactly 2 minutes looking at a textbook. By lowering the barrier to entry to an absolute minimum, you bypass your brain's natural resistance to discomfort. Once you take that initial, tiny action, a subtle psychological shift occurs. The sheer momentum of having started creates a spark of inspiration, which triggers a wave of motivation, making it significantly easier to take the next step. Action can, and should, precede motivation. Let's look at how this applies directly to entrepreneurship and day-to-day productivity. If you're trying to build a new platform or launch a side hustle, waiting until your product is flawless before showing it to the world is a recipe for disaster. You are letting your fear of failure disguise itself as perfectionism. Instead, apply the do something principle. Build a messy, basic prototype and push it live. Let the market give you feedback. Let the inevitable bugs and criticisms show you exactly where you are wrong, so you can iterate and improve. In the real world, the person who fails the fastest and adapts the quickest will always outpace the person who is too terrified to try. Now, as we learn to embrace failure and master the momentum of action, we run directly into a critical bottleneck in modern life. Your energy and time are finite. This brings us to a massive, life-altering principle that separates emotionally mature individuals from those who remain perpetually overwhelmed: the importance of saying no. We live in a culture that suffers from an obsession with accumulation. We are told to say yes to every single opportunity, yes to every social invitation, yes to every side hustle, and yes to everyone's demands on our time. We treat saying yes as a badge of honor, equating a packed calendar with a successful life. But if you cannot say no, your yes becomes completely meaningless. When you refuse to reject anything, you are choosing a life without boundaries, which inevitably leads to chronic stress, resentment, and mediocrity. To understand why this happens, we must look at how healthy relationships and personal priorities are built. True depth, meaning, and connection in life require commitment. And commitment, by its very definition, requires you to reject alternative options. When you choose to commit to a specific career path, you're saying no to dozens of other potential jobs. When you commit to a deep, healthy romantic relationship, you are saying no to other prospective partners. When you commit to mastering a specific skill, you are saying no to 100 distractions. Rejection is an absolute necessity for human psychological health. It allows us to establish firm boundaries. Boundaries are the invisible lines that separate your emotional responsibilities from someone else's. People with weak boundaries usually fall into one of two toxic categories. They either take on total responsibility for other people's emotions and problems, or they expect other people to take responsibility for theirs. Let's look at a practical, real-life application of this concept in relationships. Imagine a couple where one partner constantly acts as a fixer. Every time the other partner throws a tantrum, makes a poor financial decision, or feels upset, the fixer immediately drops everything to solve the problem, placate them, and absorb the emotional fallout. This looks like extreme care on the surface, but it is actually a deeply unhealthy dynamic. The fixer is saying yes to a burden that isn't theirs, while the other partner is avoiding the necessary suffering of personal accountability. A healthy relationship requires both individuals to have the strength to say no. It means being able to say, "I love you, and I am here to support you, but this is your problem to solve, and your behavior right now is unacceptable." It means being able to hear a no from your partner without feeling like your identity is under attack. When you accept rejection as a neutral, healthy mechanism for maintaining alignment. You stop walking on eggshells and start building trust based on radical honesty. This principle applies just as powerfully to our professional growth, personal development, and productivity. If you are a student or a young professional trying to advance your career, you will constantly face a barrage of distractions disguised as opportunities. You will be tempted to join every club, attend every networking mixer, or take on extra tasks that have nothing to do with your core mission. Without the ability to say no, you end up scattering your mental energy across a mile-wide surface that is only an inch deep. You become a classic people pleaser, constantly seeking external validation by trying to make everyone happy. But when you master the subtle art of saying no, you protect your focus. You gain the freedom to dedicate your highest quality hours to the few vital priorities that actually align with your core values. Whether that's mastering a complex technical framework, building a business prototype, or spending deeply meaningful time with your family. To do this effectively, you must become intensely aware of your selective attention. You have to realize that every single time you look at a notification, click on a clickbait headline, or get dragged into an internet argument, you are giving away a piece of your life. You are letting external forces dictate what matters to you. Saying no isn't about being cold, cynical, or unhelpful. It's about being an active, fierce gatekeeper of your own mind. It is the realization that to say a powerful, impactful yes to what truly matters, you must comfortably and unapologetically say no to everything else. This brings us to the final, most profound, and utterly unavoidable realization of the human condition. And then you die. Death is the ultimate elephant in the room. It is a topic that our modern, hyper-optimized society does everything it can to avoid, sanitize, and sweep under the rug. We live our lives as if our time on this planet is completely infinite. We waste hours scrolling through feeds. We obsess over minor slights. And we let fear dictate our biggest life choices, all while completely ignoring the absolute certainty that one day, our hearts will stop beating and everything we have built will dissolve into history. But Mark Manson argues that mortality awareness is not a depressing or morbid concept. In fact, it is the most powerful tool we possess for cultivating radical clarity and living a deeply meaningful life. When you look at your life through the lens of your inevitable demise, all the trivial, superficial worries that consume your daily existence instantly evaporate. Think about it. When you're lying on your deathbed, looking back at your time on Earth, you're not going to care about that awkward text message you sent 5 years ago. You're not going to care that someone disagreed with your post online, or that you didn't buy the absolute newest model of an electronic gadget. You won't give a F***CK about the superficial metrics that comparison culture tries to force down your throat. All of that vanity completely strips away, leaving behind only what is genuinely important. Your relationships, your character, the meaningful struggles you chose to face, and the legacy of impact you left on the people around you. Confronting our own mortality forces us to ask the ultimate question of purpose. What will my legacy be? What am I building that will outlast my physical presence? This completely alters your decision-making process across every single area of life. Let's look at a practical application for an entrepreneur or a student building a career. When you lack mortality awareness, your choices are driven entirely by immediate, low-level emotional reactions. The fear of failure, the need for quick validation, or the desire to please your peers. You play it safe. But when you realize that your time is a strictly limited currency, your appetite for calculated risk changes. You realize that the absolute worst-case scenario of failing at a bold business venture or bombing an interview is completely insignificant compared to the tragedy of reaching the end of your life and realizing you never truly tried. This stark realization perfectly prepares us for a comprehensive final summary of Manson's philosophy, where we can synthesize all these principles into a practical action plan for navigating modern life. When we look back at the biggest lessons from the book, the entire philosophy can be distilled into 3 massive pillars. First, radical personal responsibility. Accepting that while you're not to blame for everything that happens to you, You are entirely responsible for how you choose to respond. Second, values-based living. Shifting your focus away from shallow external metrics like wealth, status, and pleasure, and anchoring your identity to internal, controllable values like honesty, humility, and self-discipline. Third, the acceptance of suffering. Understanding that friction is an evolutionary necessity and that a good life is not defined by a lack of problems, but by the ability to upgrade your problems over time. Unfortunately, the most common mistake people make is falling victim to the trap of toxic positivity and entitlement. They spend their entire lives trying to bypass the natural laws of human growth. They chase a perpetual high, seek constant comfort, and try to avoid the necessary emotional friction of admitting they are wrong, saying no, or facing failure head-on. They look for a static equation for happiness, only to find themselves completely overwhelmed, anxious, and deeply unfulfilled. To focus on what truly matters, you must actively implement a daily practical action plan. Step 1. Audit your values. Sit down and honestly examine what you are giving your limited CKs to. Are you measuring your worth by your social media engagement, your peers' opinions, or the absolute certainty of your beliefs? If so, deliberately choose to fire those values and replace them with metrics you can actually control, like your effort, your integrity, and your willingness to learn. Step 2. Practice the do something principle. The very next time you find yourself paralyzed by overthinking, fear of failure, or a total lack of motivation, stop waiting for inspiration. Lower the stakes to an absolute minimum. Commit to taking one tiny, microscopic action. Write one line of code, read one page, or have one uncomfortable 2-minute conversation. Let the momentum of action generate the inspiration you need to keep going. Step 3. Establish strong boundaries. Start practicing the subtle art of saying no. Reclaim your selective attention from the digital noise and people-pleasing tendencies. Protect your time and energy fiercely, dedicating your highest quality hours exclusively to the vital few priorities that genuinely align with your core mission. Ultimately, personal growth is an active, messy, and intensely vulnerable process. It requires you to step out of the illusion of being special, to embrace the profound humility of knowing you are wrong about almost everything, and to step directly into the arena of meaningful struggle. Life is far too short, and your mental energy is far too precious to waste on things that do not move the needle for your soul. Choose your battles wisely. Accept the pain, master your choices, and focus entirely on the beautiful, brutal, and deeply rewarding process of building a life that truly matters. Now that we have explored the entire foundational blueprint of Mark Manson's philosophy, let's bring all these concepts down to earth and look at how they apply to the highly specific, high-pressure situations we face every single day. Let's start with a practical application that impacts almost everyone: career growth, productivity, and decision-making. In the modern workspace, we often fall into a devastating psychological trap called the perfectionism paradox. We get so wrapped up in the fear of making a mistake, missing a deadline, or launching a flawed product that we end up paralyzed. We overthink our choices, request endless feedback, and delay critical actions under the guise of making things perfect. But when you apply values-based living and emotional maturity to your career, your relationship with work completely transforms. You realize that perfection is a superficial metric. It's an illusion designed to protect your ego from judgment. Instead, you switch your core metric to consistent iteration. You stop trying to avoid the discomfort of a sloppy first draft or a buggy prototype. You embrace the fact that you will be wrong. You welcome the neutral data that failure provides. And you use the do something principle to generate immediate momentum. This is exactly how successful entrepreneurship works. The most resilient founders aren't the ones who possess a flawless, error-free master plan from day one. They are the individuals who are willing to sustain the specific pain of public rejection, financial uncertainty, and constant pivots. They don't give a CK about protecting their ego. They care about solving a real, concrete problem for their users. They understand that every single bug, every negative review, and every failed launch is not a personal insult, but a valuable lesson that forces them to upgrade their problems. This mindset shift is equally transformative for students navigating intense academic pressure. In a hyper-competitive educational environment, it is incredibly easy to develop a deep sense of entitlement or a paralyzing fear of failure. You might tie your entire self-worth to a test score, a GPA, or the prestige of a specific college. When you bomb an exam or struggle to grasp a complex technical framework, your brain interprets it as an existential crisis. But when you strip away the entitlement and accept your own ordinariness, the crushing weight of academic anxiety completely lifts. You realize that being bad at something initially is the natural baseline of human learning. You stop studying to prove how smart you are to your peers, and you start studying out of a genuine value of curiosity and self-discipline. You build mental resilience by choosing the meaningful struggle of sitting with a difficult concept for hours, knowing that the cognitive friction you're experiencing is the exact mechanism that builds intellect. Finally, let's look at how these principles rewrite the rules of social media, confidence building, and daily peace of mind. We live in an absolute gold rush era of validation seeking. Our phones are engineered to exploit our evolutionary need for tribal belonging, constantly tempting us to trade our selective attention for a quick hit of dopamine in the form of likes, views, and comments. This comparison culture leaves us trapped in a state of perpetual overthinking, wondering if we measure up to the idealized, filtered versions of reality we see online. The antidote to this digital overwhelm is the intentional practice of selective rejection. It means having the emotional maturity to look at a trending online controversy, a peer's flashy milestone, or a manufactured internet argument and comfortably say, "I do not have the time, energy, or obligation to care about this." You become fiercely protective of your mind. True confidence isn't standing in front of a mirror trying to convince yourself that you are a flawless, unstoppable genius who will never experience self-doubt. True confidence is walking into a room, an interview, or a social gathering and being entirely at peace with your own flaws, your limitations, and a high probability that you will make mistakes. It is the deep, liberating realization that you don't need the world to validate you, because you have already chosen the internal metrics by which you measure your own life. You are the sole author of your choices, the guardian of your boundaries, and the absolute owner of your destiny. Thank you so much for listening to this complete audiobook summary of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK * by Mark Manson. If you found these insights valuable, please take a quick second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below sharing the number one value or principle you're going to apply to your life starting today. Your engagement truly helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing these powerful ideas to light. Welcome to the Growth Room. This channel is entirely dedicated to helping you level up your mindset and master your reality. Every single week, we dive deep into the world's most transformative books on success, self-improvement, discipline, productivity, psychology, and personal growth. We don't just summarize chapters. We dissect the underlying psychological principles and break them down into practical, no-nonsense strategies that you can execute immediately to build a highly effective, resilient life. If you are committed to continuous learning and breaking free from mediocrity, you have found your tribe. As we close out today's session, I want to leave you with a powerful final thought to carry with you into the arena of daily life. Right now, in this very moment, you are holding the pen to your own story. Stop waiting for the world to become easier. Stop waiting for your challenges to magically disappear. And stop giving away your precious, limited mental energy to things that simply do not matter. The struggles you are facing right now are not obstacles keeping you from a good life. They're the literal raw material out of which a meaningful life is built. Embrace the friction. Have the courage to be beautifully, authentically flawed. Take radical responsibility for your choices. Step boldly into the discomfort of growth. And remember, you don't need a problem-free paradise to be fulfilled. You just need the strength to choose the right things to care about. Go out there, protect your boundaries, stay disciplined, and build a legacy that matters. Thank you for tuning into the Growth Room, and until next time, keep growing.